Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the next session on the MVPDays Community Roadshow for March 2018. This session is around the new and cool tools you can use with Windows Server and clients, specifically management with Project Honolulu. My name is Mike Nelson. I'm a cloud architect with Zerto. You can reach me on social media at NellMedia. And I am a Microsoft MVP in Cloud and Datacenter, as well as a Microsoft Azure Advisor, a Citrix Technology Professional, and a VMware vExpert. So what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to be talking about Project Honolulu for Microsoft. That is the name it's being used right now until it goes general availability later this year. But we'll take a look at Project Honolulu, how it came to be, some of the features of it, and hopefully we'll have some time for some demos at the end. So let's get going. So Microsoft in server management world really comes out with something that is inbox to Windows Server, right? So every time you install Windows Server, you have something called Inbox Tools or the IBT. Now the IBT is a collection of tools that are like Event Viewer, the administrative tools, services, users and groups, things like that. Those are considered inbox tools. Every installation of Windows Server has those. Now, in the past, you would have to install those separately, but now they can be installed as features and roles very easily with the newest versions. They're really targeted towards individual installations and smaller installations. Now, when they start getting up to larger deployments, they start looking at not only the IBT, but adding System Center to the mix. So System Center is much larger, it's much more resources, much more administrative overhead as well, but it does manage larger environments much easier. And then you get into cloud and hybrid. When you get into cloud and hybrid, that's when you start looking at other avenues that you can go across the plane between the public and private cloud, something like Azure Operations Management Suite, OMS. That tool allows you to do both, right? System Center does too with some degree, but OMS is much more elaborate on it. Now, Project Honolulu is going to focus on all three of these, okay? But it's also going to just focus on the IBT. That's really what Project Honolulu was meant to replace, to take the place of overall. Now, Project Honolulu came about because folks were using a tool called the SMT, which were the server management tools in Azure. The problem is that in order to use those, you required an internet connection. So the users came back and said, well, we really like these SMT tools, but we don't want to have the requirement of that internet connection for domains and other places that don't, connect or we don't want them to connect to the internet, right? So Microsoft came back and said, hey, that's really a good idea. Maybe we should come up with something a little bit different than SMT, and that's how Project Honolulu came about. So going back to the inbox tools, again, the focus for Project Honolulu, right? It's a server management experiences, the evolution of the inbox tools, what's new and what's next. It is also complementary to System Center and OMS. It's not a replacement, and it's not a competitor. Okay, that's something key to keep in mind. All these tools are trying to get them to work together and be complementary to each other. So that's how we get Project Honolulu. It actually was released in September of 2017, and according to Microsoft definition, it's really a remote Windows Server management scenarios of troubleshooting, configuration, and maintenance. That key word there is remote, right? So you have the ability to take this product and install it on just about any Windows 10 client and server client, okay, and then be able to administer machines in any location, any cluster, any hybrid or public or private cloud. So in what we used to be doing when we were talking about managing servers is we would go into a server and try and figure out what's going on with it if something was wrong, right? And one of the things we would do is right away bring up Task Manager and say, hey, what is my CPU doing? What is my memory doing? What's my network doing? I got to figure this out. Then we would have to go into and use another tool just to find out if we were connected to the right domain. We had network problems. We'd have to open up the network configuration. We have space problems. We'd have to open up File Explorer. We start having to open all these tools to try and diagnose our problems and help us with administration. And it took a very long time. It took a lot of resources, and it became very frustrating. Okay, and this is exactly why Project Honolulu was built. So the architecture of Project Honolulu has to do around with having something called the web server and the gateway. That's the core of Honolulu. Now, You'll notice in this picture that there is a picture of a single server with the web server and gateway outside, and then the web server and gateway on the inside. We'll get into that in a minute, but it's the deployment options of a desktop mode or a gateway mode. Now, they do talk PowerShell on the back end. Everything about Project Honolulu is PowerShell, and it talks it all over WinRM. So it's either PowerShell or WMI over WinRM that talks to the managed clients and managed servers from the gateway or the desktop application. The user connects to it via HTTPS and can come over the firewall, okay, as long as the right ports are open. Now, some folks will say, well, I don't want it to, open up that firewall. So you take the firewall out of it, you can actually add an Azure proxy service. Okay, you add the Azure AD App Proxy connector, and basically that'll bring it back up into Azure where you can access it there, and you can have multi-factor authentication. Okay, to Project Honolulu. You can actually have smart cards. You can have Android, iOS phones, Windows phones. All that two-factor authentication can run through the Azure AD App Proxy connector. Okay, and you won't have to worry about opening up that firewall. Now, I encourage you to go to this person's blog, the GoToGuy.blog. It's outlined there, but I pretty much think you're going to see this in the documentation when Honolulu goes GA. So the architecture with Azure VM, say you want to say, hey, you know what? This is awesome. I can do on-premises, but what about Azure? So I've got some VMs up in Azure, or I've got some VMs up in another cloud provider, okay? And I want to be able to manage those as well. You can do that. You can, okay? It's not made for just on-premises. It's a hybrid cloud solution. All right, so the original architecture, you see what you have here, just like before, but now we're going to throw in some Azure VMs. Now, how do we manage those? Well, basically, they just connect over a public IP. If you have a site-to-site VPN or an express route or some other connectivity to another hybrid cloud that those VMs are in, then you don't have to worry about the public IPs. You can use the private ones. Okay, the key here is that you have to have WinRM. Port 5989 over HTTP open in order for that communication to happen. All right, not HTTPS, but HTTP. Now, it's important to note that because if you do this up in Azure, you create a virtual machine, the network security gateway is automatically defaulting WinRM to HTTPS. And you have to create a custom rule to change it to HTTP. It's in the documentation. You're going to need to know that. Now, what if you actually is like, hey, I want to throw a, Project Honolulu up in Azure? Yeah, you can do that. It just runs on a VM. Throw a Windows server up in Azure, and you'd be able to take Honolulu, throw it up there. You can manage both machines in Azure, another public cloud, your own private cloud, just about anywhere, okay, coming directly through Azure and not having to go through your on-premises. You can do that as well. You have to remember, one of the key things is that Project Honolulu, number one, is free, but it's extremely portable. Okay, and it's extremely easy to install and extremely fast to install. Okay, so it's something that, you should really look at being more of a widespread remote administration tool and not just a localized one. These are the deployment models that I mentioned earlier. Now we're going to take a look at first the desktop mode. That's the Windows 10 client. So you go ahead and install it on a Windows 10 desktop. It creates a desktop application. A desktop application has to be executed on that desktop in order for anyone to connect to it. All right, that's a little bit different than when you look at the second one, which is a gateway server. In a gateway server mode, it actually is running as a service, and it doesn't need to be executed on the desktop first. Okay. The advantage of that is you can have multiple people from anywhere connecting to that gateway server. It doesn't have to be, specific to a Windows 10 machine that's laying around somewhere on your laptop or whatever. Okay. The third scenario is when you actually want to start getting into clusters. Okay, so if you have it as a local host, so you have a dedicated host and you only want Honolulu to manage that one host, that's one option. The second one is if you have a cluster and you only want one instance of Project Honolulu to manage that cluster. Okay, and that's the only, administrative purpose of that installation. That's another deployment option. Now, there is a fourth deployment option after the desktop mode and the gateway mode. Now, this one is not officially supported by Microsoft yet. Okay, I think it will be, but it's not yet. And this one has to do with putting Project Honolulu in a container. Okay, if you're not sure exactly what containers are, or you've never really looked into them, you really need to do that. You need to understand the differences between containers and virtual machines. A container is self-contained, portable, flexible, scalable, and that's exactly what you could utilize Project Honolulu in terms of being able to take it and move it from a machine to any other machine in the world, being able to multiply that container thousands of times if you wanted to, and then being able to destroy them and recreate them within seconds. That's how easy it is. Okay, so I encourage you to check that out. Now, this is the graphic that Microsoft uses to lay the foundation for Project Honolulu and why it was built. You have Project Honolulu, simplified, integrated, secure, and cloud ready. It was actually built as more of a platform. Okay, and then it wants an ecosystem of solutions to be on top of it. So they're allowing third-party extensions to be added to Honolulu to create more of an extensibility of services and options that can not only control Microsoft products but also third-party products. All right. So if you think about it, this really could, become much bigger, and you'd have extensions that can be added for backup providers and network providers and security providers and so on and so forth. With it, you get the core admin tools, which is the troubleshooting, configuration, and maintenance, the hero scenarios, as it's called, with the hyper-converged cluster management, Azure integration, and then also Hyper-V cluster management as well. And then extensibility. You have a wide coverage, and, of course, the SDK. Now, the design choices I'm really impressed by. The design choices that they made when they created Honolulu, they really did a good job on this. A lot of it is open source, and a lot of it is proven technology. So it's not the old days of proprietary, coding and lockdown APIs and all that other kind of stuff that used to really be a burden for folks to connect to and create extensions to. Now they've done a visual design which is very clean, very, very static. It's an easy way to remember where you are, where you're going, so on and so forth. They leverage open source. Open source is huge, and they leverage that, so it's really easy to integrate into those. Building extensibility, the ability to have the core tools, but also as separate modules. Okay, and then designing for integration opportunities, the iframe separation. Another vendor can come in and create another iframe and have it pulled away from the Honolulu UI and create its own management tool. It's really kind of cool. So how does Honolulu work? Basics in connectivity, all right? So you have the gateway installed on a local laptop. Say this is a Windows 10 laptop. So you have the Honolulu installation on there. The user connects to it via their browser. They're still talking HTTPS inside of their own machine, and then they basically connect down via WinRM and talk PowerShell and WMI down to the managed hosts and clients. All right. Now, if you were to take the other scenario where the gateway is separate, okay, that's when you have, the gateway taking care of all that communication and the users just connecting the browser to the gateway. This allows for multiple users to be able to connect to that. Now, when multiple users connect, the administrator can set up roles and permissions when that becomes available in the product. It's not yet. But once it's available, it becomes more of a full-scale management opportunity and the ability to control who gets to see what. And a DBA administrator can manage his database machines and so on and so forth. So it really is something that can expand the administration capabilities. One of the things I wanted to point out is that Project Honolulu is being built on open source and really flexible tools. It allows the ability to create URLs that go to a specific function within Honolulu. All right. So if you have a service catalog that you offer employees or to your IT folks, and you say that, hey, I need access to this, you can give them direct access to enable that, or to that function, or to that server, or to whatever via a single URL. They don't have to go through and see everything else and click on everything else and then finally get to where they need to go. You can just give them one URL for all that purpose. Now we'll go through the requirements real quick. The OS supported for install, Windows 10, Server 2016, Fuller Core, Windows Server Build 1709 Core, Server 2016 or Hyper-V Server Core Container. That's not officially supported yet, but I think you'll see that soon. And then Server Gateway does require Kerberos delegation enabled in domain. There are some other products that already do that, so it may be already enabled your domain. It might not be, but you have to check that. The supported clients, Windows 10, Server 2016, and 1709. Pretty much every version from Creators Update up will be supported. 2012 and 2012 R2 require the Windows Framework 5, okay, before you can actually do the installation. I'll come up and complain about that, but you need that in order to use Project Honolulu. A certificate, obviously for secure communications between the nodes and the gateway or the desktop app. You can use self-signed or a legitimate certificate. If you do use a self-signed, there is a 60-day expiration on it. WinRM, WMI, and PowerShell remoting. These are the core communication protocols for Project Honolulu. You do need administrator rights, local domain on the target. A local administrator password solution lapse. If you're not using that, I recommend that you go out and look at that as a possibility, because it really makes administration of remote machines much easier. The Framework 5, like I had mentioned before, WinRM over HTTP inbound. Okay, so when you enable that, one thing you have to remember is when you enable that in the Windows Advanced Firewall, that it only enables it for the public network. All right, so you have to actually specifically go in and target the private and domain network and make sure that those are checked, because the public only allows for the local subnet to talk to each other, and that might cause some problems for you. The trusted host. It used to be that you'd have to do this manually. The documentation also states how to do it manually, but it is an option during the install now, and it's something that you should let the installer do, because it sets it all up for you. So from WinRM and WMI, the easiest way to set up WinRM is just to run WinRM quick config. It'll come up and ask you some questions, and it'll enable the service, and you're all set. It can be enabled on public network, like I said, but it only defaults, to the local subnet. Those are the firewall rules right there. Make sure they're HTTP and not HTTPS, and you can actually use that command that's listed right there to enable it. And then the trusted host. Again, have the installer do it for you. If you run into problems with connecting to machines, this very well could be it, that the trusted hosts aren't set correctly. Here are some tips that you can use. Number one, use tags. It's very important that you use tags, and the reason for that is Microsoft is going like tag crazy. No, in Azure, they brought tags in, and other places that they use tags, and the reason is because they're trying to get away from the whole the previous way of thinking of folders and groupings and things like that. Now, that's not to say that groups aren't going to come into the product or come into other products, but they really are trying to look at tags more, and I think it's something that you should look at. The UI can be customized, but it is kind of messy right now. You have to actually modify two files, the manifest.json and the strings.json. Those files are just, filled with all kinds of stuff. Hopefully that someone will come up with a way to easily edit those files, and you'll be able to put your logo on there and, announcements or change your themes and all that kind of good stuff. The connection entries are kept in an ECENT database. Anybody who knows what an ECENT database is, it's actually the database that runs Microsoft Exchange, and it runs several other Microsoft products, and it's very fast, very efficient, very portable, and it was something that is a core part of Server. So they really, the team decided that they didn't want to have the external SQL. And this makes everything run much smoother and much easier. So you can actually look at those databases. Here are the locations for both the gateway and the desktop install. Local administrator authentication may require registry edit on the target. That's usually when you're actually opening up the gateway. So you're connecting to the server instance that's running the gateway, and then you open up a browser on there to connect to Project Honolulu. In order to do that, the server's got some built-in security stuff that you actually have to enable this registry edit. And then the PowerShell modules. Like I said, everything in Project Honolulu is pretty much PowerShell. And they actually have the modules that you can go and take a look at inside of the directories when it does the install. So if you feel, you're a PowerShell person, you want to go take a look at what they've got, and you can use them outside of the tools as well. So quick little fact about Honolulu. The cost, it's free, of course. You can browse it using Azure Chrome, which I'm sure will expand in the future. It installs again on Server 1709, 2016, and Windows 10. And it manages pretty much the same, except that you can add 2012 R2, and then also Hyper-V Server. Connectivity, again, part of the reason why Project Honolulu was created, because Azure is not required, number one, and Internet is not required, number two. So the third, AD is not even required. You can do work groups and standalones and not have any problems at all. From a security, HTTPS, of course. Use LAPS if you can, and I encourage you to look at that. And then also delegation. Configuration. This is the simplest because of the open source that they use. IaaS is not required. Agents aren't required, which is really good. And SQL is not required. Windows framework is required. 5.1 for 2012 and 2012 R2. Positioning, again, evolution of the inbox tools, complementary to RSAT, the remote server administration tools, System Center and OMS. And feedback. This is really important. Please give your feedback to user voices, where the product team really looks for your feedback on bugs and features that you'd like to see. And then, of course, extensions with the SDK. So what's missing yet in the product? Well, quite a bit actually, but it is growing rapidly, and I think it's something that will, really grow in momentum and the capabilities and features. It has been since September, and it's the public is giving more feedback. So I think it's really gonna help it out the growth, and also they are giving some serious focus to clustering and Hyper-V, which are big target points for them. So what's coming, and this is just speculation on what I've seen on user voice and heard, third-party extensions, obviously, more server services and expansions, UI changes, maybe groups, customizations for sure, and some other things, maybe like fonts and themes. The ability to export, the ability to take the machines that you've actually put into Honolulu, export them, and then re-import them into another instance. That's kind of big. Active Directory import is really big. I have a feeling you're going to see that really soon, and be able to select your machines without having to input them manually. And then role-based access controls, that's huge as well. That's something that is being built into pretty much every product like this. So I think you're going to see those as well. The SDK we've already talked about. The RDS management, being able to manage remote desktop services is huge, and I think you're going to see that. And then there's a possibility for Linux. I mean, you can run Linux on Windows now, right? And you can also run PowerShell on Linux. So I really think you're going to see that in the future as well. So I've got a few minutes left here, and I'm going to run through a few demos for you. So to start off the demos, one of the first things I want to show you here. So to start off the demos, one of the first things I want to show you here is how easy it is to install Project Honolulu and how fast it is to install Project Honolulu. You would download the MS. Fuck. Beep. So one of the first things I want to show you in our demos is how easy and fast it is to install Project Honolulu. You basically just go ahead and download the MSI, okay, and run through the installation. And it's going to ask you just three basic questions. One is a port that you want to have the management on. Number two, create a desktop shortcut. And number three, allow Project Honolulu to modify your trusted host. Okay, I'm going to select all three. All right, we run the install. So far, what has it been, like 30 seconds? I think we're going to be done here in under 60, maybe 70 seconds. Boom, we're done. Project Honolulu is installed. We're ready to go. If I click here, it'll actually launch it. Okay, and here we go. Welcome to Project Honolulu. I'll skip the tour, and it's ready to go as is. Now, one thing to note here is this is the desktop version of Project Honolulu, right? Because this is a Windows 10 machine. So what it does is when you actually double click that icon, you're starting the application. It's a desktop application. And you'll notice down here, you'll see a little icon for Project Honolulu. It'll run in the taskbar. Now, on the server gateway, you won't see that. The reason is because it's running as a service. Okay, and it's always running in the background. So if you install it on Windows 10, you have to know that you need to double click the icon to actually have the desktop application working and have people access it remotely. All right, so I'm going to hop over to another machine here real quick. I'll be right back. Beep. So this is another machine with the installation of Project Honolulu in desktop mode. As you'll notice, okay, it connects to localhost at 6516. And when you look at it, I already have connections in, beep. So this is a machine that I connected to as a Windows 10 desktop, and it already has Project Honolulu installed. As you can see, it's connected to localhost at 6516, and then it also has connections that I've already added to the interface. Okay, now to add a machine to the interface, you just simply click Add, and it's really easy. You're just going to add a different type of connection. Obviously, this list will expand as they add capabilities. But once you actually want to add a connection, it's just going to come up and ask you, number one, assign tags to it, which is really a good idea. And then, what is a server name? Okay, is it an IP address? Is it an FQDN? You can use either one. Now, it does have an option to import servers, which means basically you can give it a text file, okay, that is either line delimited or comma delimited with a server name or a machine name listed for each machine you want to import. All right, then once the actual machine is added, then you have to set what permissions. Okay, so what you need to do is you need to highlight the machine and then click Manage As. What that's going to do is that's going to come up and ask you for what account is actually used to manage the machine. Now, you can use, if you are using LAPS, you can specify it right here. You can use, if you're in a domain, you can use there, or you can actually specify different credentials. And I do that just because I'm managing multiple domains here. If you take a look at what I actually have like a Geek Tweakers domain, a Nelly domain. I have a local administrator. I have a local machine name. And here I actually have a machine. If you notice, the public IP address is located up in Azure. All right, so I'm managing from on-premises Windows 10 desktop. I'm managing a machine in Azure, and I'm just using the name that Azure asked me to input when I created the VM. All right, so adding machines is really, really easy. Okay, it's when you actually click on them to connect that you might get that WinRM error. It can't communicate with the machine. Now that's going back to the troubleshooting where you have to figure out, hey, do I have the right ports open? And do I have the permissions that I need to access WinRM on that subnet? If it's a firewall rule, remember all those things I went over in the slides. So if you need to do troubleshooting, that's where it'll come in, because it'll come up and say WinRM couldn't connect to the machine, so on and so forth. So what I'm going to do here really quick is I'm actually going to go in and just connect to another Windows 10 machine that I have. And basically when the overview comes up, the overview of the machine is going to give you all the basic information in the machine. It's going to give you everything about the machine. It's going to give you some performance graphs of CPU, memory, so on and so forth. Okay. And I'm in a real compact view here because of my screen real estate that's needed in order to do this video. So I apologize for that. So once you're in here, you can actually go in and edit certain things. You can shut down, you can restart, you can edit the computer ID, you can even set some settings. And by settings, I mean things like even environmental variables, okay, for the user and system. You can add your own environment variables, all that. You can put up settings for remote desktop. It has the ability to connect to remote desktop. And then also, if it is running Hyper-V machines, you will see an option to actually go through and set variables, okay, and settings for the Hyper-V host. All right. That's just the overview screen. Look at everything else you get with it. You can check on devices. You can look at the events. You can look at the firewall. It'll bring you all the settings for the firewall. You can create new rules. You can delete rules, all that kind of stuff. You can look at your local users and groups. And, oh, look at here. You can even execute PowerShell. All right. How cool is that? I can't tell you how much I'm frustrated with PowerShell remoting. This one just basically goes in, gives you a terminal, does the PowerShell remoting commands for you. All you do is you enter a administrator password for remoting, and voila, you have a PowerShell prompt. From here, I can execute scripts. I can even, do PowerShell in Honolulu. How cool is that? You can take a look at processes. Like I said, you can do remote desktop. That still has some work to be done on it. Okay, I'll give you that warning. But it does work, but it needs some work. You can do services, storage. If it is a Hyper-V machine, you can even look at the virtual machines. Okay, so I have virtual machines on this box. I can take a look at them. I can look at the inventory. It can tell me the resource usage of those machines, how much CPU is being used, so on and so forth, memory. And basically, if I go into the inventory, I can actually control these machines. I can actually do a delete, a start, a turn off, go in and create checkpoints, do settings, all that kind of stuff. All right. So it really is an overall tool that allows you to do all those remote administration tasks that you needed to do with several different tools, like I had mentioned earlier on. Now, one thing I did want to note is this is a desktop installation, right? If I click on this little gear icon up here, you'll notice that I only have one option. It's general. And that allows me to manage extensions. Remember what I said, extensions? Extensions are going to be what third-party developers and what Microsoft creates to be able to plug in modules to Project Honolulu. All right? And then expand the capability of it. Okay, so you can look at what Microsoft already has as installed extensions, the device manager, event viewer, file explorer, Hyper-V, blah, 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 so on and so forth. Okay, you'd be able to actually go in and uninstall them, add extensions, so on and so forth. Now, this one over here is actually a gateway install. Okay, just the service install of the desktop, right? So this is the one that multiple people can connect to that runs on server. Now, one thing I want to point out to you is when you click on here, you're going to see another option. And that option is under access. This is where you actually set security groups, okay, for your gateway users and gateway administrators to use the UI interface of Project Honolulu. You can go ahead and add groups from your Active Directory. Gateway users, they don't have to be from Active Directory. They can be from work groups. They can be individual users. But I really think that down the line here, you're going to actually see an Active Directory, more of an Active Directory type search function that you'll be able to add, service accounts and things like that. So that about does it for me today. I wanted to get through a little bit more demonstration, but we could spend all day on this. It's really cool stuff. But I really want you to go through and watch some of the other presentations and enjoy those, because there's some really good stuff out there on the MVP days. So please, if you have any questions, get a hold of me on social media. I'll be happy to answer anything for you, help you out any way I can. Please join User Voice for Project Honolulu, install it, play with it, have some fun, and most of all, thank you very much and have a fantastic day.